As some of you may know, Adventure Time has 10 seasons, and it's always been on the limbo when it comes to its narrative structure. It's clearly episodic, yet there's an overarching linearity that keeps building and building throughout the series. So I took the challenge to try and organize this massive show into categorized phases as a way to better understand its narrative flow and evolution. Before we start, I want to make clear this isn't some attempt to fit Adventure Time into boring boxes. I'm simply offering a new perspective to look at the show as this one big mythology. First and foremost, this is purely just for fun. Alright? Alright. So, I believe it's possible to separate Adventure Time into 3 acts. Each act represents a different storytelling approach the show takes for a given period. So let's start from the beginning. How should we categorize the first couple seasons of this series? Well, since they're very straightforward, I think it's fair to call it the episodic era, which goes from seasons 1 to 3. These episodes can be identified by their lack of pretension and overall comedic nature. They're zany and fun. Which is not to say Act 1 doesn't have continuity, it definitely does. For example, at the end of Season 2, we have our first major exposure to the Lich and a drastic change in the status quo once Princess Bubblegum gets younger. However, such changes are short-lived since the Lich wouldn't return after almost 2 seasons and PB turns back to normal after just a couple episodes. Said events remain significant when it comes down to the whole scope of the show, but they're not referenced as much as you'd expect in the seasons they're located. There's not an effort to turn these episodes into big deals just yet. So naturally, the series just mostly focuses on random shenanigans. I do think there's an argument to be made about how much these seasons reference events within themselves as a counterpoint to their episodic nature. For example, the episode Crystals Have Powers is a follow-up to the events in Tree Trunks. Susan Strong introduces an important character who turns into Utopia. Regardless, I would still argue that said events haven't reached enough magnitude for the show to be considered serialized at that point. The ending of Season 3, however, changes the game a little bit, with the episodes Dead's Dungeon and Incendium. They introduced Finn's new Demon Blood-Sword and give him a new love interest, Flame Princess. That's how we move on into Act 2. While before we couldn't necessarily tell where each episode takes place in the previous seasons, with the exception of a few, most of Season 4 only makes sense if you take said seasons as past events. Out of context, this sounds pretty obvious, I know, but what I mean with this statement is that the episodes from this season are direct continuations from the previous ones. There's a clear sense that we're moving forward with what we established. The episode In Your Footsteps happens after the events of Season 2 and serves as foreshadowing for the season finale, The Lich. Lady in Pebbles takes place after Ricardio the Hard Guy from Season 1, and it also sets up a specific episode in Season 5. Even episodes that aren't in order start having connections among themselves. The episode Princess Potluck is located in Season 5, but it happens on the same day as Bimo Noir, which is an episode from Season 4. Okay, so from this point onward, it becomes impossible to ignore how much the show brings back elements to tie them together. Though I don't think we can call it serialized just yet. There's a clear trajectory now, yes, but a subtle one. The episodes themselves are still their own. There's no requirement to watch them in order, it's just that said order would provide you a better context to what the characters are doing. For example, there's a very tangible line of events in Season 5. In one episode, Finn manipulates his girlfriend who destroys the Ice Kingdom in the process. That leads to the Ice King moving in with Finn and Jake in a certain episode, which leads to the Demon Blood-Sword getting destroyed in another one, etc, etc. The status quo isn't a constant anymore, but it's also not mandatory for the episodes to function. So I personally like to call this stretch of the show the continuous era, which goes from Seasons 4 to 6. Moving on to Season 7, this is when the show fully transforms into a serialized experience. But before we get to that, this is when we take a quick detour to explain a small inconvenience in the structure of the upcoming seasons. You see, Adventure Time was originally supposed to have 9 seasons, but Cartoon Network executives decided to split Seasons 7 and 8 so that the last ones could all have similar length. So now, the show has 10 seasons. Personally, I think this ultimately hurts the series more than anything, especially considering how each of these seasons were intended to function. All of them have a reason to start and end the way they do. The new configuration is so weird that even the official Blu-ray releases opted to name Seasons 8 through 10 the final seasons, which is honestly, for the best, honestly. This just might be the best solution. It seems Cartoon Network never gave Adventure Time its proper credit for being the success that it was. But anyway, let's just move on. The final seasons of Adventure Time can be easily categorized as serialized. Obviously, just like Act 1, it has exceptions. Episodes like Bad Jubies or Scams aren't tied to a specific line of events, but most of the other ones are heavy on the continuity angle. Season 10, for example, practically requires the episodes to be experienced in order. But what really cements Act 3 as the serialized era, which goes from Season 7 to the final seasons, is the Miniseries Trilogy. Stakes, Islands, and Elements are 3 big arcs with 8 chapters each, sprinkled throughout the last couple seasons of the show. And since they're all miniseries, I think it's easy to understand why they're located here. Their existence alone is enough to justify the name of the third act. And finally, there's also Adventure Time Distant Lands, which despite being considered a spin-off, it might as well serve as an epilogue to the main show. There's just one problem though. Just like the season split fiasco, Distant Lands also suffered from a lack of proper management. Even though the episode Together Again is clearly meant to be the finale, it's still categorized as the penultimate episode on HBO Max and even the Blu-rays. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do except hope that this will change one day. I guess the real manifesto here is like, HBO, can you please put it in order? All it takes is like a mouse click. That's literally all it takes. Can you please do that? Please? Anyway, I guess as long as Adventure Time newcomers are warned about it once they go watch the show, the epilogue, I guess that's fine. But hey, that's it. That's my breakdown. I think it's fairly concise for what it is. I personally think the show isn't really talked about enough, despite it being a relative success. Not everyone has watched the series until the end, and it's always been hard to get people into it because I guess the first couple seasons can make the show seem like a one-trick pony. But oh boy, it's definitely not. So, if you have any friends you'd like to present Adventure Time but doesn't know how to convince them to stick around, try following this structure. Maybe a palpable sense of scale helps viewing the show as more easily digestible. I tried doing it with some of my friends and it really worked. And hey, if you haven't watched Adventure Time, I hope this video at least helped you appreciate this silly cartoon from an outsider's perspective. And if somehow this made you feel inclined to watch the show, I strongly recommend it. But anyway, that's all I have to say.